I think by now we've seen all kinds of different versions of this depressing chart, total U.S. debt. Back in 1998, we'll be talking about that year when Bill Clinton was president and we had our first budget surplus since 1969. The debt level was about $5.5 trillion. When I arrived here my first year in the Senate in 2011, that was about $14 trillion. I ran, quite honestly, because we were mortgaging our children's future. We'll talk a little bit about 2014 when President Obama had a certain spending level. That was up to $17.5 trillion. As recent as 2019, before the pandemic, our debt was somewhere around $22.5 trillion. Today, our debt exceeds $36 trillion on a path toward much higher heights. If you look at President Biden's final budget here, he's predicting our total debt will be $52 trillion at the end of 10 years. This is clearly unsustainable. As I said, it's a depressing reality. The result of all that debt, one of the many results, was the devaluation of the dollar. A dollar you held in 1998 is only worth 51 cents today. We basically cut the value of a dollar in half since 1998. 2014, when President Obama was president, now the value of that dollar is only worth 74 cents. The value of a dollar prior to the pandemic, 2019, is now only worth 80 cents. That's why people can't afford things. This inflation caused by massive deficit spending, this is the stealth tax on every American. It's a very regressive tax. It primarily hurts people at the bottom part of the income spectrum. You know, wealthy individuals have stocks, they have other assets that inflate as the dollar devalues. So again, this harm primarily affects lower income Americans. The people, the men and women who work are harmed by this. This can't go on. This is an outrage. This is a tragedy. Mr. President, I just want to ask a little bit of a hypothetical here before we talk about this chart. Let's say you're an American family of four, and you're doing pretty good. You make and you spend about $100,000 a year. Let's say the next year you have a serious illness in your family, and all of a sudden you have major medical bills totaling $50,000. So the next year you spend $150,000. Let's say you get some good news. That medical condition is now solved, your family member is healed. What would most American families do? If their income level stayed the same, around $100,000, I don't think they'd keep spending at a $150,000 level. They certainly wouldn't borrow $50,000 to maintain that spending level. They would reduce their spending level back to what it was before the illness, right? They go back to somewhere around $100,000, maybe a little bit more based on inflation. That's not what the federal government did. This, I know, is shocking most Americans as I'm laying out the reality of the situation. In 2019, prior to the pandemic, total federal government spending was $4.4 trillion. Then we had COVID, and I think we very unwisely shut down a lot of our economy. It destroyed people's businesses. It destroyed people's lives, our miserable, failed response to COVID. It cost a lot of money. So Washington went on a massive spending spree. In the year of the pandemic, we spent actually closer to $6.6 trillion. Now again, if it would have been like a normal family, once the pandemic passed, we would have returned to some reasonable spending level, but we didn't do that. The last 5 years now, we've spent, on average, $6.5 trillion. That's $2.1 trillion more than we spent in 2019. There's no justification for that. This last year, we spent a total of $6.9 trillion, $2.6 trillion, $2.5 trillion higher than the $4.4 trillion. Again, there's no justification for that. So the question I've been asking is, how do we return to a reasonable pre-pandemic spending level, I will guarantee you that the people that voted for President Trump do not expect the federal government's going to continue spending at President Biden and the Democrats who've been in charge at their spending levels. This is unacceptable. It's unsustainable. So what I've done is I've laid out a couple of different options here. Again, I'll use another analogy. Let's say that same family of four I was talking about that had an income of about $100,000. Let's say they have a baby. So now their population, their family size has increased 25%. I think most people would recognize that if that family of four could increase their income 25% from $100,000 to $125,000 and then tack on an amount for inflation. Let's say it's 3% inflation up to $128,750. I think most people would recognize, well, now that family's kept whole. They've been made whole. They've been able to maintain their standard of living. Well, I think the same thing would be true for the federal government. For Americans living within America, looking at different benefits that the federal government bestows on Americans as it extracts our hard-earned tax dollars. So I went back to a number of different years prior to the pandemic. I went back to 1998. Again, that was the first year we actually had a budget surplus since 1969. That's how irresponsible the government's always been. But back in 1998, what a magic moment. We actually had a budget surplus. That was under Bill Clinton. We spent $1.7 trillion. So, that's obviously too low because we've had inflation, we've had population growth. So what I've done in each one of these scenarios here is I've taken the basic spending levels, I've increased them based on population growth and inflation, plus I exempt Social Security, Medicare, and interest. And I've plugged in President Biden's 2025 budget amounts for Social Security, Medicare, and interest. So the result of that analysis for 1998, for Bill Clinton's spending level, I don't think anybody would really argue that Bill Clinton spent too little in 1998. If you did that, inflate it, increase it based on population and inflation, plus you use today's 2025 Social Security, Medicare, and interest expense, you'd end up at $5.5 trillion. It's not a secret. The reason I chose 1998, I looked at all these years, doing that with 1998 spending levels, if you compare that to President Biden's budgeted revenue for this year, which has not decreased because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, revenue has consistently increased to $5.5 trillion, we would have a balanced budget. What everybody says is impossible to achieve, going back to Bill Clinton's spending levels, increasing them by population and inflation, and using today's Social Security, Medicare, and interest expense, would balance the budget. We wouldn't have to increase the debt ceiling. We wouldn't be experiencing or threatened by more inflation. Okay, if that's too reasonable for Washington, D.C., let's look at another scenario. Let's take a look at at Barack Obama's, President Obama's spending levels in 2014. Again, I don't think President Obama was spending too little in 2014. I was here. He was spending too much. But if you take his 2014 levels, inflate them by population growth since then and inflation, using today's Social Security, Medicare, and interest, we'd be spending $6.2 trillion this year. Pretty reasonable. Not a balanced budget, but a whole lot better than the $6.9 or the $7.3 trillion that President Biden budgeted for this year. A far more reasonable spending level. But if you don't like that, if that's just too reasonable, too aggressive for you, just go back to 2019 when we spent $4.4 trillion. Increase it by population growth, inflation, using President Biden's Social Security, Medicare, and interest, it'd be 6.5. I think that's completely unacceptable. That's been the average. We increase that, $2.1 trillion above the $4.4 trillion, it'd still be a whole lot better than President Biden's $7.3 trillion or last year's spending of $6.9 trillion. How can anybody justify spending at this level when we were only spending $4.4 trillion 5 years ago? Here's what I'm suggesting. Set those other scenarios aside. President Trump was just elected. Again, I don't think anybody, certainly not me, I voted for President Trump. I was not expecting President Trump, and I do not expect him to come into office and accept and spend at President Biden's levels. So I would encourage President Trump to go back and take a look at the final budget he proposed back in fiscal year 2021 and look at his estimate for spending in 2025. So I've done the exact same thing. I'm using the fiscal year 2025 estimates from his last budget, but I'm using this year's Social Security, Medicare, and interest expense. If we do that, we're looking at a spending level of about $6 trillion. So again, we can look at individual expense items. You can take a look at defense if you don't think we're spending enough on that, if it's too risky a world. I mean, somewhere within the range of 5.5, which would literally balance our budget up to $6.2 trillion. That's a reasonable base that we ought to include in a budget we'll be passing this year that should drive future spending. That would reset spending levels to a far more reasonable level. And again, let me just reemphasize. Whether we use Bill Clinton's 1998 spending level, which would result in a $5.5 trillion baseline, Barack Obama's 2014 spending levels, which would result in a baseline budget of $6.2 trillion, or President Trump's final budget, which would result in a $6 trillion spending level, that's a reasonable approach. That's what families do. That's what businesses in America are forced to do. They don't just say, spend whatever you want. Put 70% of our spending budget on automatic pilot. We'll never look at it. We just spend whatever we want. That's how you bankrupt a family. That's how you bankrupt a business. That's how we're mortgaging our children's future. It has to stop. So I'm putting everybody on notice. I'm on the Budget Committee. I'm on the Finance Committee. I'm going to insist that the budget we pass, now that Republicans are in control in the Senate, returns to some reasonable baseline. Listen, I'm reasonable. I'll negotiate. I'm not saying this is gospel. This isn't etched in stone. But President Trump, our majority leader, our majority leadership, House leadership, they're going to have to justify to me how you would justify spending more than these reasonable baselines. I ran in 2010 because we were mortgaging our children's future. I remember doing parades, shouting that. We're mortgaging our children's future. It's immoral. It has to stop. We're spending 25% of GDP at the federal government level. That's not the vision of our founding fathers. Of sovereign states, where government is primarily at the state level, at the local level, where it's close to the people, where it's more efficient, it's more effective, it's more accountable. Now Washington is gobbling up all of our resources, borrowing these vast amounts of money, devaluing our currency. They're not solving problems. They're not reducing poverty. They're not making lives better. They're putting American lives at risk. And as government grows, our freedoms recede. And Americans have to understand of all the things that have made this country great, the men and women who have worked and built this marvel of a nation, the one essential ingredient they've always used is just that freedom. It's freedom that allowed them to dream and aspire and build and create this marvel of a country. It's freedom that allow these young people sitting in front of me here to do the same thing. But as long as government continues to grow, those freedoms will necessarily recede. It's a direct relationship. So we allow government to grow way too large. It influences too much of our lives, negatively influences it. We need to jealously guard our freedom. We need to jealously reclaim our freedom. And the best way to do that is to shrink the size, scope, and cost of government and its influence over our lives. And the only way to do that is you have to reduce total spending by the federal government. This is the metric. We talk about all kinds of things. That's the metric. And one final point. We're not going to be able to tax our way out of this. We don't have a taxation problem, we have a spending problem. And I just want to make my final comment. The refuting of the false narrative that we hear ad nauseum from the other side. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act did not cause our deficits. When CBO scored that, the score at the time of passage was that it was going to reduce revenue and increase our deficits by $1.5 trillion. When CBO then, after passage, I think it was April 2018, projected out revenue for 10 years, if you take a look at that revenue, from 2018 through 2024, we actually have the actual results. They projected about $27 trillion worth of revenue over that 7-year period. The actual amount of revenue we raised from 2018 through 2024 was $28.7 trillion. We beat CBO's estimate by $1.7 trillion. So if the original score was $1.5 trillion, it was. In 7 years, we actually beat their estimate by $1.7. We paid for that tax cut in 7 years, plus $200 billion. And we had the severe COVID recession in the middle of that. So don't believe anybody that tells you the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act caused our deficits. They didn't. They paid for themselves in less than 7 years and then some. We have a spending problem in this country. There's no justification for going from $4.4 trillion to $6.5 trillion. And now we're at 6.9 with no end in sight. This is immoral what we're doing to our children. We've got to get this under control. And this is about as good a rationale, as good a justification for setting some dollar limit and using the budget process unlike we've ever used it before. Not just for being able to pass some kind of reconciliation package with a mere majority vote, but actually use the budget the way American families and American businesses do to set the spending limits. And then ask our committees and the chair of our committees to take those budget caps seriously and figure out how they can structure spending, how they can structure these programs to actually live within those budget caps. And again, if they actually used Bill Clinton's 1998 spending level and inflated the way I've done here, actually balance the budget. That's what the people who came out in November voting for President Trump, that's their goal. That's their expectation. I suggest we live up to their expectations. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Recognize the senator from Wisconsin.
I'll note we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'll ask consent to be able to speak up to 25 minutes before taking the vote.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'll ask you, I'll ask everybody in the chamber, everybody listening to me on C-SPAN. Aren't you getting sick and tired of these government shutdown showdowns? the drama, the turmoil, the partisan bickering, the holding American people and our economy hostage for demands for billions and billions of dollars of more spending that we can't afford? I know I am. This madness doesn't have to continue. We can begin ending this madness tonight by voting on a very simple piece of legislation. Eliminate Shutdowns Act. Again, it's very simple. All it does is, if we don't pass an appropriation bill for all of government or any department, we don't shut those departments down. We don't shut all of government down. We do literally what the state of Wisconsin has done since the 1950s. We just keep spending at last year's levels. I mean, how more common sense can you get? Now, we accomplish that by enacting 2-week rolling continuing appropriations to fund, again, all of government or any department that doesn't have an appropriation passed for it on a rolling basis. Now, I asked the chamber, who could be opposed to something so simple that, again, prevents all this turmoil, all this drama, all this partisan bickering? Well, my guess is Democrats will oppose it. My guess also is some of our appropriators will oppose it. I've heard some of the rationale. I don't think it really holds water. What one point made is the problem with continuing resolutions. They fund programs that should be reduced or canceled, and they prevent important new programs from being started. Well, again, that will create the incentive. I agree with that, by the way. I don't like CRs either. That will create the incentive under these automatic, rolling, 14-day continuing appropriations to pass appropriation bills. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form diminish or detract from the authority of appropriators or the Appropriation Committee. I've also heard that appropriators, they want the pressure of government shutdowns to allow them to pass appropriation bills. I guess I somewhat understand their point, but I'd like to point out that that pressure certainly hasn't worked. Mr. President, I got here in the year 2011. I don't think anybody can dispute the fact that, at least since that point in time, and probably before that, the appropriation process is broken. It's dysfunctional. In 15 years, what we should have done in Congress is pass 180 appropriation bills during those 15 years. 12 a year times 15, 180 bills. You know how many we actually passed? 6. 6 bills. 1 for fiscal year 2017, 5 for fiscal year 2019. 6 bills. That's 3.3% success rate, or stated a better way, that's a 96.7% failure rate of the appropriation process. During that 15 years, we've had 3 shutdowns. We passed 55 continuing resolutions, 55. And people are going to oppose an automatic rolling continuing appropriation? By the way, this year, the continuing resolution that we did pass, it took us 6 months. 6 months of dysfunction before we finally passed the appropriation for this year, which, of course, is going to end in a day and a half. Now, what the shutdown pressure did produce is it produced the pressure to mortgage our children's future further. It produced the pressure to pass multiple 1,000-page omnibus spending bills. We've increased or suspended the debt ceiling 12 times in those 15 years since I've been here. Our debt has gone from $14 trillion to over $37 trillion. Clearly, this is a broken process. Spending is completely out of control. Now, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody to find out I brought a couple charts to basically make my point. I'd like to talk about a few facts, a few figures. This chamber is generally not really interested in talking about, like, figures. I guess my accounting background, I like to do so. Let me give you a little history lesson. This dates back, these are 4-year average deficits going back to the year 2001. And you'll see in the first two terms of President Bush's administration, average deficits were $200 billion, then $300 billion. So average over his 8 years, $250 billion worth of deficits. Again, those were unacceptably high back then. That's when $100 billion or two actually was real money. People were concerned about it. President Obama came into office with the Great Recession, and his advisor, Rahm Emanuel, said never let a good crisis go to waste, and they didn't. So in his first term, President Obama's average deficit was $1.27 trillion. That sparked the Tea Party movement. I'm part of that. And the Tea Party came, we actually made a difference. We did dig our heels in on that out-of-control deficit spending. And so for President Obama's second term, deficits averaged $550 billion. Again, $550 billion, that's a lot of money, except in Washington, D.C. President Trump came into office, divided government, and he had to do deals to get spending bills passed. So his deficit increased to $810 billion for the first 3 years. Then COVID hit. We went on a massive bipartisan uniparty spending spree, $3.1 trillion a year deficit. $3.1 trillion. We went from $4.4 trillion in spending to $6.5 and never looked back. Now, responsible leaders would have recognized that was an aberration. We can't keep spending once the pandemic's passed. You know, back in World War II, we had responsible leaders. We started World War II spending 11.7% of GDP. During World War II, that increased to 41% for the war effort. But responsible leadership brought that spending back down to 11.4% of GDP after the war in 1948. That's not what the Biden administration did. They kept spending at pandemic levels. We averaged during Biden administration deficits of $1.9 trillion. We'll have a deficit this year about $2 trillion. And the very sad fact is over the next 10 years, based on CBO's most recent figures, the total 10-year deficit is going to equal about $26.4 trillion. That's $2.6 trillion per year. It starts out about $2 trillion, ramps up to over $3 trillion by the year 2035. Now, most of our party leadership says the problem here is we have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Let me just prove that point. This is one of my favorite charts that literally shows no matter how much we try and punish success with the top marginal tax rate, we've had back in 1959 a top marginal tax rate of 91%. How much would you work if the federal government took 91 cents of every dollar you made? I wouldn't work very hard personally. It's been as low as 28%. I would say for a brief period of time, we were 72% free under Ronald Reagan. Now we're at 37% top marginal tax rate. But again, you can see the ups and downs. What's noteworthy about this chart, no matter how much we try and punish success, over time, it's been very consistent. We're able to extract 17.1% of the American economy in federal revenue. We've had a high of 20%, but that was after the dot-com bubble, and that quickly came back down to 17.1% average. It's time we recognize that reality. If we're going to ever balance our budget, what we need to do is get spending under control. We have a spending problem, which I think this chart clearly demonstrates. Back in 2000, we spent $1.8 trillion. 1.8 trillion. That was 17.7% of GDP. That was the year that we had 20% of revenue. We had a surplus for 4 years. We had a surplus for 4 years, and we frittered that all away. We finally broke the 2 trillion mark in the year 2002 after 9/11. All of a sudden, we're on a war footing. We had to spend more to defend this nation. And again, we've never looked back. The absolute high point, other than World War II, the high point in spending was during President Obama after the Great Recession, 24.4% of GDP. By the way, that year, because of the recession, revenue went down to 14.4%. That's what produced those massive deficits of $1.2, $1.3 trillion. 2014, again, the result of the Tea Party, we pretty well held spending flat about $3.5 trillion for about 5 or 6 years. And so spending as a percent of GDP, which is a relevant figure, dropped down to 20.2. This year we're going to be spending about over $7 trillion, greater than 23% of our economy. And we're going to collect about 17.1%. We've got in excess of a 6% structural deficit. It's clearly unsustainable. Now, I hear a lot of talk about, well, Ron, it's all mandatory spending, which is a problem. Okay, all these government shutdowns is all about 25% of federal spending, the discretionary accounts. We have 75% of our spending in mandatory. But you have to understand, it's not all Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid. Over the decades, I'm researching to see exactly how this happened. We've transferred what I would consider, and what probably formerly was, discretionary spending into other mandatory. So this year, we'll spend about $1 trillion in other mandatory spending. And what this chart shows is the variance between 2019 spending plussed up for population inflation, leaving Social Security, Medicare, and interest alone spent at 2025 levels. If we were to do that, instead of spending $7 trillion this year, we'd be spending about 6.5. Other mandatory, again, not Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid, we're spending $239 billion more than inflation and population adjusted 2019 spending. I don't think we were spending too little in 2019. Non-defense discretionary, up about $145 billion over fully inflated 2019 levels. So that's not the problem. Now, just one other fact I want to dispute, particularly for defense hawks in my party, because I hear it a lot. Well, the good news is we've got parity between defense spending and domestic spending. I don't know what figures they're looking at, but if you only consider non-defense discretionary, yeah, I mean, the increase from Bill Clinton is pretty close to 1-to-1, but that was before 9/11, before we're on a war footing. Under Obama, under Trump, is 1.4-to-1 to 1.64-to-1. But again, you can't ignore the other mandatory, that other $1 trillion nowadays. If you factor in non-defense discretionary and other mandatory, we've increased spending on domestic programs 2.5 times to 1. The defense, from Obama's spending, the increase is 3.5 times to 1. Under Trump, it's 3.65. So we don't have parity. I'm sorry, defense hawks. You have had your, lights out. You've lost that battle. We're not even close to parity. Whatever you think you're getting in defense, they're getting 3.5 times that in domestic spending. And again, we can't afford it. So again, those are just some basic facts, some basic figures that explain our current fiscal situation. But let me go back to where I started. Here we are again, another shutdown showdown. Democrats' opening bid, by the way, was, okay, we'll give you a 4-week CR, 4 weeks. And all we're asking is another $1.5 trillion in spending. So we'll end the turmoil, we'll quit playing games with people's lives for 4 weeks, as long as you agree to roll back everything you passed in the one big beautiful bill and increase spending $1.5 trillion. Is that a serious starting negotiation point? I don't think so. What I'm asking all my colleagues is, please imagine a world in which these ridiculous shutdowns are no more than a ridiculous relic of the past, where we're not wasting our time and effort and energy and angst over this partisan bickering. Again, I have to remind you, the Eliminate Shutdowns Act does not diminish the authority of the Appropriations Committee. If we do these rolling continuing appropriations, now the appropriators can get together, they can find areas of agreement like we did in this chamber on Veterans Affairs and military construction and that minibus. Where there's areas of disagreement, will take some time, find the compromises. As I said, I agree with the point that the problem with CRs is they fund programs that should be reduced or canceled, and they prevent important new programs from being started. There again, there's another incentive to do appropriations, and now you have the time to do it. We won't be wasting our time and effort and energy and angst on these charades. These are charades. Now, I can't predict exactly what would happen if we pass the Eliminate Shutdowns Act. Nobody can. I can predict we will never have another shutdown ever in the federal government. I'm okay with that. Again, I don't like CRs. I don't like our current spending level. I'm willing to concede much higher spending levels than I think we can afford to eliminate government shutdowns for all time. So I can predict that. But here's something else I think could happen. If we're not wasting our time on this partisan bickering over shutdowns, there have been so many discussions about bipartisan appropriation and budget reform. Things like 2-year appropriation cycles, where instead of 12 bills, which obviously we can't pass, how about doing 6? Make it manageable. The year you don't appropriate for an account, you're doing oversight, and just reverse the cycle. I mean, I'd even consider 3-year appropriation bills, 4 a year. That could impinge on future Congresses. So I understand that, again, there are complications to all these things, but think positively about what ending shutdowns could do for this body, for this government, for people's lives. Passing the Eliminate Shutdowns Act, eliminating shutdowns for all time, would be a signature achievement of this Congress. Think of that. We together on a bipartisan basis can say, we're the group. After the horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk, recognize this is the moment to come together as a nation, as a Senate, as a Congress. Do the right thing for the American people, end government shutdowns. That would be a signature achievement of this Congress, and I am hoping and praying that we do that. But let me be honest. Voting no on this bill, voting no is basically voting yes for continuing the chaos and for continuing to play partisan games with people's lives and our economy. That's what a no vote is. Voting yes would help cement this as a lasting legacy for this Congress. So again, I urge all of my colleagues, please, put this partisanship aside. Recognize the value of eliminating shutdowns and vote yes on this very simple, very common sense bill that I think, quite honestly, the American people want to see passed. Now, with just a couple more minutes, I do, because I sat through the chamber, I listened to all the arguments about the Obamacare subsidies. The temporary COVID enhanced Obamacare subsidies. Nobody's talking about doing away with Obamacare subsidies. But it for sure first should be pointed out, the reason health insurance is so expensive on the individual market is because of the faulty design of Obamacare. We had high-risk pools to take care of people with pre-existing conditions. Need a couple tweaks to cover everybody. But that wasn't good enough for Democrats because they wanted a single-payer system, so they threw out and outlawed high-risk pools, and in its place forced people on the individual insurance market to pick up the full cost of covering people with pre-existing conditions. That caused insurance rates on the individual market to skyrocket. That's why insurance prices continue to skyrocket on the individual market in particular. Now, what Democrats did during whole COVID is they basically removed any participation into the Obamacare exchanges from many millions of people that qualified. The result of that is massive fraud. You have unscrupulous agents and brokers who are signing people up, just using their name and their birth date, for health insurance that these people don't even know they're signed up for. So they don't make claims. Something like 12 million people on the Obamacare exchanges out of 20.5 million had no claims. Well, that's typical. Maybe 10 to 15% of people on insurance don't make claims because they're healthy. But 12 million out of 20.5? Estimates are at least 6 million don't even know they have the policy. So we are literally pouring tens of billions of dollars per year into insurance companies for policies for people that they don't even know they have them and they don't use them, while we're paying commission to those dishonest brokers. That's a massive level of fraud that apparently Democrats have no problem perpetuating. Republicans have a problem with that. We want to lower premiums by doing common sense reform and repairing the damage done by Obamacare. But again, I think what I heard on the floor needed some response. So, Mr. President, that's my response to that, and I'll just end, again, encouraging all my colleagues. The American people don't like these shutdowns. They want them ended. We have a very simple bill, not partisan. It really offers no advantage to anybody, which is perfect. It just keeps the government open and gives appropriators time to do appropriating, appropriate those departments, and end all the chaos, end all the turmoil, end all the playing games with people's lives. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do want to thank my friend from North Dakota. We see things slightly different, but one thing I think we'd probably agree on. You know who is getting paid? The House of Representatives, who's been on vacation since the middle of September. And gosh, wouldn't it be great if they were actually on the floor debating this issue as well, as opposed to getting a taxpayer-paid vacation for over a month? But, you know, Mr. President, I think one of the things we would all kind of agree on, our nation's public servants are not political pawns. I say with due respect to my friend from Wisconsin, you know, the so-called Shutdown Fairness Act, in my view, is anything but fair. And frankly, this entire year has been anything but fair for all of our federal employees who show up every single day to serve the American people. Because remember, before Russ Vought even set foot in the Office of Management and Budget, he bragged that he wanted federal workers, his words not mine, increasingly be viewed as villains and put them in trauma. Think about that. This wasn't some political misstatement or slip of the tongue. It's frankly a mission statement. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we've seen from Mr. Vought, from President Trump, and from those enabling him. In just 9 months, they've forced out or driven into early retirement more than 148,000 federal employees. That's not efficiency or reform. It's an assault on the very people who work every day for the American people. And God knows we can improve, but also make government perform. Now, let's be clear. It's not this side of the aisle, Democrats, who have cherry-picked a few favorite programs to protect. We have been consistent on calling on the administration totally reckless regard for vital services the American people rely on to keep them safe and secure, and standing up for those folks who deliver those services. So forgive me, Mr. President, when I say I don't think the Shutdown Fairness Act has anything to do with fairness. Once again, federal employees are being treated not as partners serving the American people, but as punching bags for vote and the president's political agenda. Right now, the president is trying to riff another 4,000 federal employees. Not just, I believe, unfairly, but actually illegally based upon a court's recent decision. And thank goodness the courts have stepped in. Matter of fact, many of us were at the OMB headquarters across next to the White House just last week, meeting with federal employees, demanding Mr. Vogt and his team listen, not to us, you don't have to listen to us, we're political different sides, but listen to the very federal workers whose jobs, and make sure they would get the government reopened, not trying to leverage this for some kind of political win. We're talking about special education programs that support kids with disabilities. We're talking about the CDC, whose experts track outbreaks and try to keep us safe. We're talking about a program called the CDFI Fund at Treasury, a program which broad bipartisan support that helps invest and get access to capital in rural communities and urban communities. And again, on this one, I got to thank particularly Mike Crapo, but a whole lot of my Republican colleagues for being willing to push back. Let's be crystal clear. These actions are not some accident. This is a deliberate choice, a deliberate effort to hold federal workers hostage in order to jam through an agenda that at the end of the day is going to drive up health care costs for millions of Americans. Instead of sitting down with us and working to keep premiums affordable, they're using these very federal workers, and I got a ton of them in Virginia, as political pawns. It's wrong, it's cruel, and it's not going to work. That's why I'm proud to join both the ranking member, Peters, who will be here, I believe, shortly, and my good friend from Maryland, Senator Van Hollen, on legislation to ensure that not the Trump administration pick and choose who we ought to go ahead and pay, but legislation to ensure that all federal workers, and by the way, and the contractors who work side by side with them, get paid during this shutdown. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a moment for every senator to decide. Are you going to stand with the federal workers who keep the government running, or are you going to stand with those who want to traumatize them and make them all be viewed as villains? This is an actual chance. In a few minutes, we're going to have to make sure that those workers can feed their families, pay their mortgages, while this Republican shutdown drags on. I mean, a lot of language on this floor about who wants to support federal workers. Well, you're going to shortly have a chance. Every senator will have a chance to prove whether they're on the side of not selectively paying federal workers, but paying all federal workers as we try to bring this shutdown to an end. I urge my colleague to do the right thing. Let's get it done. And I thank Senator Van Hollen for his leadership on this issue. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Maryland.
I want to thank my colleague from Virginia, Senator Warner, and other colleagues who are joining together to support the proposal that we are putting forward today. But I think we should all say that the best way to make sure that federal employees, all federal employees, get paid and that the American people get the benefit of their services is to reopen the federal government and do it now, which is why I and my Democratic colleagues have voted 7 times now to reopen the government without giving Donald Trump a blank check and while making sure that we prevent a health care crisis in this country when people's health care premiums and costs go through the roof. Because when Republicans passed their so-called big, beautiful bill, they extended the tax breaks for billionaires and very wealthy people. The one tax cut they did not extend was the one that allows middle-class families to afford health insurance. And so they left in place a ticking time bomb that's going off now. We'd like to defuse that time bomb. Instead of negotiating on that, the president has been AWOL. He has been engaged in discussions overseas regarding the Middle East, been on the phone a lot with Vladimir Putin. That's all good, but you would think the President of the United States could carve out just a little time to help reopen the government, to have a negotiation on reopening the federal government. Instead, he's bringing down Republican members of the House and Senate to the White House and whining and dining them and patting them on the back and saying, good job for, keeping this government shut down and not entering into a negotiation to bring it to a close. And of course, our House colleagues, the Speaker of the House, Speaker Johnson, has essentially got the House on a 5-week now, I don't know if we're on 6 weeks, paid vacation. I mean, they are AWOL here in the middle of this shutdown. What is the president focused on? He's asking the Justice Department to pay him $230 million for legal bills, right, directly into his pocket. He's talking about giving his buddy in Argentina a $20 billion taxpayer bailout while farmers across the country are getting hit hard because they can't sell their soybeans to China. And he's demolishing the East Wing of the White House, which is a metaphor for what he is doing to the country and people who worked for him to get him elected. I mean, he's betraying the very people he said he was going to stand up for when he said he was going to focus on prices and costs. And yet, when it comes to trying to just prevent this huge spike in healthcare costs that our people are experiencing, the president doesn't want to talk about it. So we should not be punishing federal employees for something they had nothing to do with. They're not responsible. They're innocent bystanders. They all want to get back on the job and provide services to the American people. And I'll be putting forth a proposal to say that they should not be punished and they should be paid. Now, we'll hear later today, we're going to be taking up here in the Senate a piece of legislation from Senator Johnson. And that proposal would pay federal employees who are currently working right now. Our proposal doesn't discriminate among federal employees. And here's the really dangerous part, I would argue, about Senator Johnson's proposal. We have a president, President Trump, who, along with Russ Vought, who's his guy in the cockpit at OMB, this is the guy who said publicly that he wanted to inflict trauma, that's his word, not mine, inflict trauma on the federal workforce. If you allow them to decide who they're going to keep on the job in the federal government and who they're going to pay, you're giving them also a blank check as to who they're going to send home and who they're going to punish by not paying. That's what they've been doing. Much of what they've been doing is illegal. In fact, we have a federal court in California that's already said that their layoffs of some of the federal employees and some of the agencies are illegal. But if you just let them decide who's going to get paid and who's not, you weaponize that illegality. You weaponize the federal government. And by the way, and I think we all know this, if President Trump gets to keep the folks he wants on the job and pay the folks that he wants who are on the job and nobody else, he'll have even less incentive to end the government shutdown. He'll have the government he wants, not the one that has been supported on a bipartisan basis by the United States Congress. So giving the president a blank check to decide which federal employees to punish and which ones not to punish is a very dangerous thing at this moment. That's why the proposal I'm putting forward, and Senator Peters will have an even narrower version that he will be put forward if our Republican colleagues don't support the one that I'm advancing along with Senator Warner, Senator Kaine, Senator Alsobrooks, and others, these proposals say that federal employees should not be punished. Now, we've already made that decision. We've already made that decision as a Congress in the past. During the first Trump shutdown, that was the 35-day Trump shutdown. During that shutdown, Senator Card and myself and others, we passed a piece of legislation that was signed by the president that says at the end of a shutdown, federal employees get fully paid. They're held harmless. Why did we decide to do that? Because we collectively made the right decision that federal employees who have nothing to do with the government shutdown should not be the ones punished for something they were not culpable in. That was the right decision. What my proposal and our proposal will do is based on that idea that no federal employee should be punished for something they had nothing to do with. And not only should they get repaid at the end of this, but why would we say to them that you can't have enough pay to make your electric bills, or pay your water bills, or provide for your family? Why should federal employees be the ones who are punished for the government shutdown? Why should they be the ones that have to overdraft their bank accounts, be penalized for that? That's not fair. So the proposals that we're putting forward say that in this government shutdown, federal employees, and yes, certain federal contractors who have nothing to do with this political situation that we face, they should not be the ones to bear the burden. And we certainly shouldn't set up a system where the President of the United States gets to decide what agencies to shut down, what they can open, who to pay and who not to pay, who to punish, who not to punish. That just gives him a blank check to put in place political cronies and pay them, and send home hardworking civil servants who perform important functions. So that's what our proposal will do. And for any of our colleagues, regardless of the side of the aisle, who agree that federal employees should not be the ones who are punished for something they got nothing to do with, I hope we'll all agree to support this measure. Now, I don't know if Mr. President, Senator Peters wants to talk at all on this particular proposal. He's going to be talking on the next proposal. I know that some of my colleagues are on the way to the floor as we speak, Senator Kaine and others. And I will, when they arrive, I will return the floor to them to have say their piece. But at this time, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S. 3039, introduced earlier today, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. President, I've come here today on the floor in good faith. I've come here not to argue. I've come here trying to find agreement. And I've listened to the senator from Virginia, now the senator from Maryland, and I have to say, I don't know exactly what percentage, but probably 95, 98% of what they've said, I agree with. Now, I do have to point out, and this would be the most, I would say this is a partisan comment. We have voted now 12 times on a measure that would open up government. It's what the House passed as a clean CR, similar if not identical to what happened 13 times during the Biden administration, just a clean CR to open up the government at President Biden's levels, funding levels that Democrats voted for. By the way, House Republicans could have come with a table, a CR with $1.5 trillion of spending reductions to match the $1.5 trillion of spending increase the Democrats wanted. And now there'd be areas of compromise. But the House Republicans basically said, here's the deal. Let's not shut down government. But let's not make federal government workers pay for our dysfunction. So they passed a clean CR, the President Biden's funding levels. So again, that's been voted down 12 times, regrettably. But let me set that aside. I found out about the Senator from Maryland's proposal last night. Got the language this morning. I've got the bill here. And first of all, I kind of chuckled because the name of the bill is I've actually got the true Warren Buffett tax, and we ought to talk about that later on. You might find that interesting. But so he's taken my bill, the Shutdown Fairness Act. Now his bill is the true Shutdown Fairness Act. And again, I haven't done a word count comparison, but it's probably like 95+% of the Shutdown Fairness Act. That's a good thing. That shows there's a lot of areas of agreement. I come from the private sector. You don't get a whole lot accomplished arguing all the time. It's all about finding areas of agreement. I got a product, you want to buy it, now we'll haggle over the price. Okay, so I got a product, you want to buy it, now we need to haggle over the price. Now, the three areas of the differences in these bills, I think I've got this right. I'd asked the Senator from Maryland to confirm that. Your bill is only for this fiscal year. My bill would just end this, punishing federal workers for our dysfunction forever. I mean, I think we should make it permanent. The Senator from Maryland's bill includes furloughed employees. Now, the fact of the matter is, when all this is said and done, when we finally end this dysfunction, we fund government through an appropriation, because the 2019 Government Fair Treatment Act, the Government Fair Treatment Act, they'll get paid anyway. So my bill is obviously targeted to the people we're forcing to work, but I'm not necessarily opposed to paying furloughed workers as well. That's something we can talk about, okay? The last difference is it limits reduction in force. Now, I come from the private sector. Nobody likes to terminate employees. Nobody. But in the private sector, when a business is facing bankruptcy, sometimes business owners are forced to do that to preserve the other jobs. The federal government is $38 trillion in debt. I don't think we should limit the president's ability, the chief executive's ability to properly manage the federal government and make the tough decisions sometimes to reduce the workforce, cut out some government functions. But again, that's something we can talk about. So again, I think, in fairness of the more than 2 million in federal employees that are now being forced to work because they're termed accepted, but that means they're essential. They're protecting our nation. They're protecting our safety and security. They're writing Social Security checks to see that they get their paycheck so they don't have to work DoorDash, so they don't have to go to food banks. So they're not under that stress. I am asking in good faith, let's figure out how to get that done. Now, I mean, I could propose, take this, I'll change the name of mine, by the way, if you want to call it the true, because I think it's the true Shutdown Fairness Act. I would be, today, right now, I'd be willing to add furloughed workers, because we're going to pay them anyway. Would you, just ask you, I mean, would you substitute your bill, take my bill, substitute it in? I've actually got my staff to write the language to do this. Red line is probably not ready for prime time. We really need to get through Ledge Council, that kind of stuff. But would you take my bill, add furloughed workers, say it's a done deal? Is that something you'd accept here today?
I'm happy to, if you're yielding the floor to me.
Yes.
The short answer is we do want to pay all federal employees because none of them should be punished. But we also don't want them to be fired and riffed during this period of time. I mean, you said in the private sector, people don't like to fire employees. I know, Senator, you've read the remarks of Russ Vogt, the head of OMB. He wants to visit, quote, trauma on federal employees, and he wants to fire a lot of them. He has said so.
That's, again,
but that's an important piece here, right?
So, Senator, again, I'm trying to keep this Let's not argue, okay? Let's focus on areas of
I'm
agreement. Okay,
giving- yeah.
so even reduction in force, okay? Again, I think we probably have a philosophical agreement there. I'm not associating myself with anybody else's remarks. I'm just talking about that's something that I think reasonable people can disagree with. And I think reasonable people can come to an accommodation. Again, when we're talking about making sure that 2.8, I think is about the number, 2.8 million federal employees aren't worried about getting a next paycheck. I mean, that so overwhelms quite honestly, the smaller differences about the length of the bill or, what reduction in force. Again, and I'm willing to come a long way.
Senator,
I'm willing to come a long way in terms of including furloughed workers. So again, what I'm suggesting is the way to do it. And by the way, this could be a wonderful example for this body. Working on a piece of legislation that, again, you bring it to the floor. We filed it. I know it got Rule 14, but we're doing it the right way. We're going to ask for a cloture vote on it. Get it on the floor, open it up to amendments, perfect it. See what the body of the Senate wants to do with this piece of legislation that, again, we probably agree 95% of it or higher. The way to do it is when I offer my bill and we vote on cloture, vote for cloture. Let's get on the bill. Let's start discussing today. I mean, maybe if we're so successful, maybe if we find the differences are so slight, we can pass it by UC later in the day. But we do need to take this back to our conferences. We do need to go to ledge staff. We need to perfect this. It'll probably take more time. But again, passing it by unanimous consent is not the way to do it. It just isn't. I mean, I appreciate the attempt. I appreciate the dialogue. And that's not what I'm asking in all sincerity, for the benefit of those 2.8 million workers, our military, our law enforcement. Let's take that burden off them today. Let's give them some hope to know this body is going to finally do something in a nonpartisan, I call it a nonpartisan way, that we all agree on. We're going to iron out our differences the way you would generally do it, the way it used to be done, by getting onto a bill, voting for cloture, having the will of the Senate work its way, and then hopefully pass it early next week. That would be my suggestion. Again, I'd be willing to do it today. I don't think we could probably handle that because there's things to discuss. That's all I'm asking.
If gentlemen will yield, look, thank you. Look, it'd be great to work this out because there seems to be some agreement that federal employees should not be the ones to bear the burden of a decision they had nothing to do with. I see the Republican leaders here with us on the floor. I think the best way to proceed would be to delay moving forward on the cloture vote on the motion to proceed on your bill, and let's sit down and let's talk about whether or not we can find that common ground. We may not be that far apart. I will just say to the senator, that if you give the president the authority, as your proposal currently does, to decide who to send home and furlough and punish, and it sounds like you're willing to change that, but here's the scenario I worry about. If you listen to Russ Vought and the president, they would just fire those people during the shutdown. That's what they're doing. In fact, they're illegally firing people during the shutdown.
Again, Senator, I really didn't want to come and argue.
Okay, well, why don't we sit down? Why don't we sit down together?
I have to dispute that because even the National Active and Retired Federation Employees Association, who has endorsed my bill, says the bill does not single out favored political functions over disfavored ones. And you understand, under the Anti-Deficiency Act, under the opinions from the Office of Legal Counsel, accepted employees, it's pretty well standard. There may be some tweaks back and forth, which is what you give the latitude of the executive branch. Again, I'm willing to sit down. I'm sure the Republican Congress is willing to sit down and go, okay, what should we do? I think Congress has given way too much authority to the executive branch. I don't mind dialing that back a little bit. But again, the way to approach that is let's get on the bill. Let's talk about it. Let's offer amendments, amendments that pass by voice vote, and let's get it done. There's a lot of pressure on all of us. We all want to get this done. But again, passing by unanimous consent is not the way to get it done. The way to get it done is the way the process should work. I mean, Wouldn't it be wonderful to actually see the process work in the Senate? Again, I realize you don't like, you don't
Senator,
agree
so
100%
I
on my
would-
bill. So
I
let's
would
get
love
on-
to
let's
see the
get on
process
bill,
work.
And then let's sit down in good faith, let's hammer out amendments, and let's get the thing passed next week. Let's do that. That's all I'm asking. Again, I honestly hate to object to this. I don't want to, okay? But again, this is not the way to pass it. So again, I'll speak to my bill. I know we've got to get votes for that kind of stuff. But again, truthfully, I'm in as good a faith as I possibly can be. We have to get this done. And the way to do that is vote to get on the bill. Let's sit down and talk in good faith, and let's see and hammer out what it might be pretty minor differences when all's said and done, okay? But with that...
Well, let me just say, Mr. President, and just to say to the Senator Johnson, I'm more than happy to sit down with you. I think we should do that maybe later today, get our teams together, see if we can resolve some of these points. Because if we have the shared view that, number one, no federal employee should be punished for something they had nothing to do with, and that at least for the period of the shutdown, the president should not be able to fire additional people, which is, I think you well know, and this was partly considered by the federal court already. The president actually has less authority to do in a shutdown than when the government's open. But I don't want to debate these issues on the floor right now.
Sure.
I am more than happy to try and sit down with your team and see if we can
Let me
resolve
quick address that. I think this brinkmanship has got to end here. I mean, I've been here 15 years. We should have passed 180 appropriation bills. Before the start of the fiscal year, we've passed 6. Again, a lot of people working in good faith to do that, okay? It's obviously broken. We've got to start working on appropriation and budget reform. We've got to start working on that together, okay? But my guess is part of what's happening with reduction in force is that brinkmanship, trying to get you folks to just agree to what you've done 13 times. Just open up the government, then we'll talk, okay? We're more than open to talk. But anyway, so again, I'm literally begging you, please.
Well,
when we vote on cloture, vote to get on the bill, and then let's go through the amendment process, and let's get it done quick. Again, there's not that big a difference. We can get this done, but again, I hate to do this, but with that, I will object, and just, again, beg.
Objection heard.
Let's
Mr. President,
Senator from Maryland.
as I said to the senator from Wisconsin, I'm happy to sit down with him and his team to see if we can put together a proposal based on the principle that no federal employee should have to bear the burden and the pain of a decision they had nothing to do with, as well as many of these federal contractors who are also involved. So I welcome the chance to sit down with Senator from Wisconsin. I also hope that the President of the United States will sit down with Democrats to resolve the overall issue and open the government. That way, we wouldn't even have to go through this exercise right now. With that, I want to yield the floor to my colleague from Maryland, Senator Alsobrooks.
Senator from Maryland is recognized.
Mr.
Senator
President,
Alsobrooks.
thank you, first of all, to my colleague, Senator Chris Van Hollen, for yielding. And I also want to thank the senior senator from Maryland for his work on this legislation, the True Shutdown Fairness Act. Senator Van Hollen is a tremendous partner on this critical issue and an advocate for the thousands of federal workers in our great state. Maryland is home to 494,000 federal workers and federal contractors and 34,000 uniformed military personnel. Many of these Marylanders have spent their lives serving their fellow Americans, fighting to defend our country, ensuring our food and water are safe, making sure our parents and grandparents get their Social Security checks, and researching cures to cancer. That they have been characterized by this administration as an enemy worthy of trauma is repugnant. If you live in Maryland, you know a federal worker. They are your friends, they're your neighbors, they are the people like my grandmother, Sarah Daisy. You see, Sarah Daisy worked as a housekeeper in Washington, D.C., but dreamed her entire life of working in the federal government. Back then, and many will recall, she had to pass a civil servants exam, which included a typing test in order to work in the federal government. But she couldn't afford a typewriter and didn't know how to type. So she taped a white piece of paper on her refrigerator. She drew a keyboard on that piece of paper and stood in front of her refrigerator in her one-bedroom apartment every night and taught herself the keystrokes. Well, Sarah Daisy passed the exam and got herself a job working in the federal government. It was her dream. She worked in the Hoffman building. She'd always tell me about it. I could vividly remember her saying that she was so proud that she walked past this general and that general in the hallway. She was very, very proud. And I am honored to be her legacy and to be fighting for the countless Marylanders just like Sarah Daisy, who are being so cruelly targeted by this administration. Now, thanks to Republicans in this body who have chosen to follow this president's order and shut down the government, many of our federal workers are working without pay, still in service to our country. The rest have been furloughed to no fault of their own. Our ask today is simple: pay them for the jobs that they were hired to do. We are now in day 23 of this Republican shutdown, and let us not mince words. Republicans hold the keys to the kingdom. They have control over the White House. They have majorities in this chamber and in the House. And what have they done with that power? Has the cost of your groceries gone down? No. Has the cost of housing gone down? No. Has our economy gotten stronger? Absolutely not. What have they done? Shut down the government. That's it. This shutdown is on them. We know it, they know it, and the American people know it. It's been 23 days of this administration refusing to come to the table in good faith and negotiate a plan to keep the government open and make sure that health care is affordable and accessible for millions of Americans. It's been 23 days of this administration using the shutdown as an excuse to further target federal workers who are my constituents. My state is home to 494,000 federal workers and contractors. All of them are feeling the pain from this president's refusal to do what he supposedly loves to do best: make a deal. Right before the shutdown began, the very sinister Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought instructed agencies to use a shutdown as an opportunity to issue permanent government layoffs. Vought then began circulating a memo that would seem to challenge the legality of furloughed workers receiving back pay. By the way, Congress passed a bipartisan law ensuring their back pay during the last Trump administration. Yet this administration continues to disregard the rule of law. Just last week, Vought ominously tweeted, "The rifts have begun." He then directed federal agencies to begin illegally terminating thousands of federal employees. This is a man who is outwardly and very sinisterly, in a very sinister way, taking pleasure in harming federal workers. Hours later, President Trump and Secretary Kennedy fired more than 1,700 more people from the Department of Health and Human Services, including staffers that work to prevent measles outbreaks, before admitting that they had sent nearly half of the notices to employees at the CDC in error. Imagine that. With the family to support, you get a notice that you're fired before getting another email hours later telling you that your RIF has been rescinded. The chaos and the cruelty is unconscionable. Thousands of dedicated civil servants have been shown the door by an administration who, in the words of the Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vought, has said that it is his intention. He said that he hopes that federal workers will no longer want to come to work because they will be in so much trauma. He also said that he hoped that they would feel like villains. So there has been a systemic dismantling of our federal government, a witch hunt targeting patriotic people across this country who raised their hand to serve the American people. All of this chaos is needless. It is a manufactured crisis. So many Marylanders would like to show up to work today and serve the American people, but they have been left behind by this administration. hundreds of thousands of civil servants have been either furloughed or forced to work without pay, all because this president has decided to shut down the government instead of lower health care costs for Americans. We need to ensure our workers are paid. The truth of the matter is that we are now just 9 days away from open enrollment beginning, when Americans will begin to sign up for their health care plans for next year. And they are already facing sticker shock. Even with the state stepping in, a 60-year-old couple living in Salisbury, Maryland, making $90,000 a year, will pay $1,100 more per month for health care. They will have to pay $1,100 more per month next year. For a family of 4 in Maryland making around $128,000 a year, and for context, that's the combined salary of a firefighter and a teacher, they will be paying $1,427 per month next year versus $916 this year. If the president and our colleagues on the other side of the aisle get their wish and allow the tax credits to expire, nearly 90,000 Marylanders could be priced out of their health insurance altogether. So we will keep fighting for health care because it's what Americans deserve. But this chaos is unsustainable, and we must have faith that soon this season will be over. I know soon there will be a morning, not like the morning that we have awakened to today. Today's morning brings about chaos and fear and confusion and division. But I know soon there will be another morning where Americans will wake up across our country and not fear that they will not be able to afford rent, groceries, and health care. Right now, it is our duty as members of the United States Senate to pay our federal workers. Our government will cease to function if we do not, and the damage, I fear, is irreparable. Yet, just like Russ Vogt, my colleagues today are picking winners and losers, putting forth legislation that would only make sure that accepted workers are paid, instead of the entirety of the federal and military workforce that has been held hostage by this Republican shutdown. We cannot cherry pick who gets paid during a shutdown based on our perception of the political affiliations of our patriotic civil servants. We must pass legislation that ensures our federal workers receive the paychecks that they have earned. Around 750,000 federal employees have been furloughed this month at no fault of their own. Hundreds of thousands of these employees live in our region, in Maryland, in Virginia, and the district. Senator Johnson's bill would ignore these dedicated workers, leaving them to continue to go without a paycheck while President Trump refuses to get back to the bargaining table. They cannot afford to wait for the president to tire of throwing celebratory picnics or tearing down the White House for a gilded ballroom. They cannot afford to wait for Speaker Johnson and House Republicans to actually show back up to work. In case some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have forgotten, federal workers don't just serve Democrats. They serve every American citizen who needs their help. Researching cures for cancer isn't just for people who live in blue states. Making sure that people get their Social Security checks isn't some left-wing conspiracy. I would assume that everyone in this body agrees that Americans should get paid for their labor. Well, if you believe that, you will support our bill. It took courage and dedication for my grandmother, Sarah Daisy, to learn a new skill in order to serve her country. And each day, our armed service members and civil servants show courage and dedication to serve and protect our country from harm, to make it a better place. Let's show courage today. Work together and pay all federal workers, because we all know federal workers are Republicans, Democrats, and independents. They are not political pawns. They are patriots. I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that myself and Senator Johnson be permitted to complete our remarks prior to the scheduled roll call vote.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to request unanimous consent to pass my Military and Federal Employees Protection Act. I understand my colleague from Wisconsin objected to Senator Van Hollen's proposal. And while I support my colleague from Maryland's legislation, I'm now going to offer an alternative that is very, very straightforward. It seems to me that we all agree in this chamber that we want to pay our federal workers. My bill will do just that and nothing else. The Military and Federal Employee Protection Act provides pay for members of the military, federal employees, and federal contractors who have been denied paychecks during the government shutdown. So let's be honest why we're all here. The shutdown is not an accident. Republicans right now are refusing to negotiate with Democrats on a bipartisan solution to help address the health care crisis. And now, as a result of that, federal workers are paying a price. My bill ensures that no worker is left behind during this difficult period. Congress has already guaranteed that all employees receive their paycheck when a shutdown ends. In 2019, Congress voted overwhelmingly for a bill to provide all employees back pay once a shutdown ends, and actually President Trump signed that bill into law. So the government is already required to pay all of its workers. What my bill does is very simply just ensure that these workers can actually now pay their bills that are coming due this month. Those bills aren't going to be postponed. They need to be paid this month. And while I appreciate my colleagues' interest to ensure that all workers are paid, I appreciated the comments that Senator Johnson made. My legislation will provide pay for all service members, federal employees, and contractors that have missed paychecks due to the shutdown. But it doesn't do other stuff that his bill does, which gives President Trump an unlimited blank check to pick winners and losers. We're just focused on what I think all of us agree on. This legislation that I'm offering is the absolute simplest path forward to pay our workers. We all say we agree on this, so let's just pass this bill now, get workers their paycheck. You know, I'm going to continue to work to end this shutdown and address the health care crisis, but in the meantime, let's protect our service members and our federal employees, not put other stuff in the bill, just pay them so they can meet their bills as they arise. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S3043, introduced earlier today, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. President, again, I'll condense my remarks because so much of what I want to say I already said to the senator from Maryland. I think it's interesting that the senator from Michigan supports the senator from Maryland's bill, which is a more comprehensive bill, I think, as I, again, only saw this now, but hopefully I get it right, but I think yours is just limited to the time period from the shutdown until the bill is passed, and then we're in the same situation. You know, if the shutdown continues, hopefully it won't. You know there's a way of doing it. Just vote for the clean CR. But again, I really don't want to object to these bills, but in this case, understand that the way to pass this into law, and as I was speaking to the senator from Maryland as he exited the chamber, wouldn't this be a wonderful demonstration for the Senate, for Congress, for America, of how you pass a piece of legislation? You take a bill, again, I realize you don't 100% agree with my Shutdown Fairness Act, fine, but I think we're probably 90+% agreement on it. So you vote for cloture to get on the bill, then you work in good faith on the areas of disagreement, let the Senate work its will through an amendment process. And again, this is a pretty small little piece of legislation. It's an incredibly important piece of legislation, incredibly important, because we all agree we don't want to make federal employees pay for the dysfunction of this body. So let's first demonstrate that this body can actually function the way it's intended to function, which is write a bill, get it filed, have the leader file cloture on it, have the body vote to proceed to the bill with 60 votes. You don't need all of you. We need about, we need 7 of you, 8 of you, okay? Have 8 of you agree to get on the bill, then we'll work in good faith, and we'll make sure that we don't make federal employees pay for our dysfunction. So again, I do have to object, but again, I'm urging, I'm begging colleagues from the other side of the aisle, vote for cloture, and let's iron out these differences, and let's make the federal employees, let's make them whole. But I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan is recognized.
So I appreciate the comments from my colleague from Wisconsin. We have worked together on a lot of bills together. We have come together to find common ground on some, at times, contentious issues. And I agree about the 90% comment that Senator Johnson mentioned. What I'm actually proposing right now is that 90%. It is really simple. This is as simple a bill as you can get. We can show the American people that we come together on a bill that's really straightforward, no gotchas, no language that might trip people up. It's simply pay folks, make sure that they're made whole as this passes so they can pay their bills, and then we can continue to deal with the other issues of the day. But I think this would be an example of bipartisan coming together unanimously to say that here is a bill that will pay service members and federal employees and contractors, make them whole so they can make their bills. We don't need to have a protracted process. This is a simple issue if we focus on the 90% we agree on, and that's what this bill is. It is the 90%, and I hope we could just pass it today and put the minds at ease of hundreds of thousands of folks all across the country.
Senator from Wisconsin.
So I think now we're going to proceed to the cloture vote on the Shutdown Fairness Act. Just in response real quick, it's unrealistic to expect almost any piece of legislation to pass by unanimous consent a bill that's just been introduced that exact morning. No matter how simple it is, there's going to be people that are going to object. So that's why the process is file a bill, file for cloture, to proceed to, get on the bill, have an amendment process, and go through that process. Now, it can go very quickly, but again, doing this by unanimous consent is just unreasonable. And so that's unfortunate. So again, the solution here is vote for cloture to get on the bill, the Shutdown Fairness Act. Now, I will try and keep my remarks reasonably short. I was allotted 20 minutes, but I know people are already here on the floor to vote, so I'm mindful of that. But just quick little history of my experience here since I got here in 2011. This is our 4th shutdown now. We're in the 23rd day. We've had 55 continuing resolutions. And most of them, again, I haven't voted for all of them. I've voted for many of them. Other colleagues on both sides have voted for those. I mean, generally, the fight is over, let's just have a clean CR. Let's not junk it up with policies. And there's, that's the loggerhead here. One side refused to just do a clean CR. We've had 12 either increases or suspensions of the debt ceiling, and we've just surpassed $38 trillion in debt. I realize people work in good faith on the budget process. I'm on the Budget Committee and the Appropriations Committee. I see the former chair and ranking member of the Appropriations Committee on the floor here. The sad fact is, since I've been here, we should have passed 180 appropriation bills prior to the end of the fiscal year that we're going to fund. We've only passed 6. That's a 96.7% failure rate. It's clearly broken. The budget and appropriation process is broken. Rather than spending weeks arguing over how to get the government back open, I'd much rather sit down in a nonpartisan way and go, how can we fix this? Can we go to 2-year appropriation cycles? I mean, what can we do the budget? I mean, I'd much rather talk about that and understand that there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on proposals, but we'll never get to that if we're literally mired. Last year, it took us 6 months to finally fund the government with a continuing resolution. This is beyond ridiculous. So again, this is a bipartisan problem here. I'm not placing blame anywhere. It's a bipartisan problem. Now, unfortunately, we haven't passed any appropriations. Pointed out before, the Democrats have forwarded 13 times during the Biden administration for a clean CR at Biden spending levels. Now they're saying no, they won't. And of course, their leader, in doing that, on January 16, 2024, said, quote, passing a clean CR this week is important for two main reasons. First, passing the CR will avert a harmful and unnecessary government shutdown. No reasonable member of either side, Democrat or Republican, wants a government shutdown. Now, that's not Leader Thune saying that. That's then Leader Schumer saying that. Now he's obviously completely changed his tune. Now, I did point this out. This is important to understand, because the other side is saying, well, why don't you sit down and negotiate and compromise? I mean, the House could have passed a CR with $1.5 trillion in spending cuts to match the CR proposed by the Democrats of $1.5 trillion in new spending. Okay, there you go. Now you got something to compromise on. That's not what the House did. The House said, well, let's do what we've done 13 times under the Biden administration. Let's just pass a clean CR at Biden's level and really beg the Democrats to say yes, but they haven't been willing to do that. Again, I know people are waiting to vote. I'm not going to talk about the issue, the fact that Obamacare is causing premiums to skyrocket and what they're demanding in terms of extending the enhanced subsidies that were supposed to be temporary. They set the expiration date, but it's Obamacare that's causing premiums to be unaffordable, and they want those enhanced premiums to mask the failure of Obamacare. But I won't get into detail on that. I will talk about, this is day 23. We are forcing about 2.8 million federal workers to work. Military, law enforcement, people who write Social Security checks, air traffic controllers, keeping our skies safe. But we're not paying them. That's absurd. Now, what's even more absurd is they will get paid. Whether they're working or furloughed, they will get paid because of the Government Fair Treatment Act of 2019. Once this ends, I'm assuming it'll end with an appropriation, they'll get paid. So the Government Fairness Act, all it does is recognize that reality. It shouldn't cost a dime. CBO has a alternate universe score on this. There's zero score. This doesn't cost federal government a dime. Just pay the workers that are being forced to pay them now, not later. Incredibly common sense. I'll end with a surprising support letter I got from the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association. They pretty well bat down all the arguments against this bill. Doesn't change the government's obligation to pay furloughed employees. They'll get paid. It does not single out favored political functions over disfavored ones. Again, President Trump is by and large honoring the past opinions of Office of Legal Counsel, Anti-Discrepancy Act. They say they don't believe is empowering the administration to pick and choose what activities it carries out. And includes, say, the American public relies on the full scope of federal agency missions that are funded via appropriations, and political pressures that exist to advance appropriation bills in the first place will remain to encourage resolution. So no, we're not there yet, I'm sorry. I'll conclude quickly, okay? The bottom line is, as I talked to the senator from Maryland, the way to pass this law, the way to protect federal workers, isn't with the unanimous consent request on a bill nobody's ever seen. It's to vote for cloture on the Shutdown Fairness Act. Now, let's work out the differences. We agree on 95% of it. Let's work out those differences. Vote for cloture. We get this passed, I think, early next week. With that, I'll conclude my remarks on that. I should be speaking about 5 minutes on a wonderful nomination, Rebecca Tableson for the 7th Circuit, but I know everybody wants to vote. She did a wonderful job in the judiciary. She's a highly qualified lawyer. She'll make a wonderful judge for the 7th Circuit. I urge all my colleagues to vote for her cloture on her confirmation. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, let me first say that there's something that we all agree on, Democrats and Republicans here in this chamber, is we want federal employees to be paid. It's simply unacceptable that they have to work and come to work every day, do their job, and not get paid. That's why we got to end the shutdown as quickly as possible. We're focused on doing that. But that's not really exactly the total story behind the Johnson bill. I have legislation to pay federal employees now. We could vote on that now. I offered it in a UC request from my colleague from Wisconsin and said, we have a bill to pay all federal employees right now. No strings attached, no language that gives the president more power, more flexibility to do things that we should not want him to do. But my Republican colleagues don't want to have that bill. Senator Van Hollen, another colleague of mine, has a bill to pay it. It has complete support of Democrats. Let's pay them. We have two bills that if we put on the floor right now, we could pass. If my Republican friends really want to do it, we could pass it with 100 votes. And I'm happy to, it's my bill, but any of you can sign it. I offered it to my colleague from Wisconsin. It could be your bill. Give it. I don't need any authorship of it, but it's a bill that does exactly what my colleagues across the aisle are saying, just pay federal employees. That's what it would do, and yet that's rejected. So why? Well, there's a little bit more in this bill. In fact, the Johnson bill before us actually creates an unlimited and permanent slush fund for President Trump to use. You're not going to get support here from us to transfer what should be congressional power to be able to determine when we want money spent, it actually gets spent the way it should be. It's not about passing a slush fund to the president. The president could justify the transfer of this money elsewhere. This is something clearly the administration wants because it's going to give the White House more power. The bill adds presidential authority by it omits the regular safeguards that we include in normal funding bills to ensure that money actually goes where Congress intends. Now, we've been seeing a lot of that. The president basically is just thumbing his nose at Congress every day. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues say, well, that's okay. If the president doesn't want to listen to the Congress, that's okay with them. We are a co-equal branch of government. We're elected by the people back home to represent our people as senators. We're not here just to rubber stamp a president. I know a lot of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle, I'm surprised because a lot of really great people that I have a lot of respect for, and yet we see the president constantly run over Congress, and it's crickets on the other side. No pushback from my Republican colleagues, either here in the Senate or in the House. There's actually, in this bill, there's no explicit guarantee or requirement to actually pay out this money. The administration could sit on this appropriation. We're just blank check appropriation for employees, but the administration can just sit on it for or those particular programs they don't like. That's why in a normal appropriations bill, we put in language to prevent that. Now, granted, the president has been ignoring Congress, but at least we put it. We're saying these are the rules. Congress has the power of the purse. It's Article 1 of the Constitution. And yet a lot of my colleagues don't seem to take that to heart. So most of Probst's bills, including the current House continuing resolution proposal, actually includes restrictions on how funding should be used. The Johnson bill includes no restrictions. And we know that Trump has shown that he will abuse the budget process in very novel ways. He has said that he will refuse to pay back pay to workers even when Congress has explicitly said it. This bill hopefully does address that. He's transferred money illegally to pay for his political priorities, and he impounds money whenever he finds any kind of wiggle room to do that. So in a sense, this bill is a Trojan horse. It's there to say we're going to help federal employees, but it's really continued power for the president. I've heard my colleagues say that the federal employees are being used as pawns. That's what this bill does. It's using federal employees as pawns to give the OMB and the president a whole lot more power to use a slush fund of money in any way he chooses. We know the OMB director, Russ Vought, likes this bill. We know what Russ Vought's about. In fact, I think there was a leaked speech that Russ Vought had. We mentioned this in the committee, and my colleagues, I appreciate them saying how wonderful federal workers are. But this is what the OMB director, who says this is really a good bill, the Johnson bill is a really good bill. He said, we want the, quote, we want the bureaucrats to be trauma. They have to be affected by trauma. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want to put them in trauma. I hope my Republican colleagues called out Mr. Vogt when he said that, because you care so much about our employees. I appreciate that. But when folks in the administration say things like this, please say that is wrong, that we really do care about you. Not when you're trying to put a bill forward that's going to give the president an unlimited slush fund. Let's be real. If you want to pay employees, which I hope you do, if you want to move forward, then take a bill that we know has the kind of guardrails that our appropriation bills normally do to make sure the money is actually spent as we intend in Congress, which is the way it's supposed to work under Article 1 of the Constitution. I still believe in the Constitution. I still believe that we are a co-equal branch of government. We are not simply a rubber stamp for the president. And if we don't change that way, that's how you lose the checks and balances that our founders cared so deeply about. You know, as our founders were debating the Constitution, they didn't trust any of us. They knew, they're politicians too. They knew you can't trust anybody. So they figure we're going to have three branches. We're going to have the judiciary check the Congress and the president. The Congress will check the presidential power. And Article 1 is the Congress. They thought the Congress was the most important one. But they kind of assumed that the Congress would actually exercise its power and check presidential power, not just hand more to them with a smile and then use false pretexts in order to give that money. So that's what this bill is about. And you know, I've tried to work with Senator Johnson. I will always want to work with him. We've worked on a number of bills together. We have language. Again, the bills that we have that I've introduced, which is the Military and Federal Employees Protection Act, it's a straight, clean bill. Talk about union support. Every union has supported my legislation. Every union has supported Senator Van Hollen's. And we're now getting unions. Unions are starting to read the fine print on this bill right now. So we have AFSCME that's now come out against it. We got the SEIU that has just come out against it. We have the AFL-CIO that has just come out against it. We have the IFPTE that just coming out. And our union friends are going to read the language of this bill and they're going to like, oh, we should have read the fine print. Like, yes, it's really important to read the fine print. So we can't support this bill. We can support a bill that pays all of our employees, but it's got to be one that has the types of protections that we have in every other appropriations bill that we try to pass out of this body. So I'm going to oppose this, but hopefully we can find a way to work together. We have two bills ready to go we could pass today, but with this bill, we are going to object to this one.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Is the senator from Wisconsin?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not quite sure what planet the senator from Michigan comes from, but here in planet Earth, when you read the actual language of the bill, none of these FANA provisions exist in there. But I will go through those point by point before we call for the final vote. Right now, I think Senator from Nebraska has a few points he wants to make. Mr. President, I don't want to spend all the time refuting all the misrepresentations from the senator from Michigan in terms of what phantom provisions he claims are in my bill. There's no slush fund. It is completely silent on presidential authority. I know some people want to reduce authority, but that's a bill that won't be signed. If you want to pay the federal workers, if you want to stop punishing them for our dysfunction, if you want to stop using them as pawns in this political game, that's a demand you have to drop. The money appropriated in this bill will go to pay workers. That also was a false argument. But if you're not quite satisfied with the language, it's been out there and we've been trying to work and get feedback for 2 weeks, and we've gotten excellent feedback from leadership, from discussions on both sides of the aisle, from OMB trying to perfect this thing. The solution is get on the bill. Get on the bill and offer amendment. Keep talking to us. Don't close it down. Now, we heard from a number of our Republican colleagues. We heard from Senator from Michigan. Yeah, obviously, passions are running high. There's a great deal of frustration, certainly on our side, when the other side simply won't take yes for an answer. But I came down here 2 weeks ago in as nonpartisan stance as I possibly could be. Because as Senator from Michigan stated, we all agree that these people ought to be paid. So the way to do that is not offer a bill on unanimous consent that has no chance of being signed into law. The way to do that is to vote to proceed tonight to this bill. If we could iron out differences, we could yield back time and get this thing passed. The Speaker of the House said he'd already come back and pass this. So we are so close. I realize they're going to be hard partisans. I know they're, liberal unions that have now come out against this, but the bulk of the public sector unions are for it. They prefer my bill over anything else that they may also support it because this is permanent. This ends using federal workforce and, quite honestly, the American public as pawns in these partisan games for all time. Again, the American Federation of Government Employees, the Federal Managers Association, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, National Air Traffic Controller Association. And again, I hope our Democrat colleagues listen to Senator Cruz's chilling and sobering remarks just a few minutes ago, the International Association of Firefighters and the Association of Flight Attendants. This bill has support because it makes so much sense. It is fair. So we had 3 Democrats join us 2 weeks ago. There are 2 other Democrats who have voted for the House CR. That brings us up to a total of 58. Now, they vote against this because we didn't have furloughed workers. We've added furloughed workers. So hopefully those 2 will join us. I have talked to enough Democrat senators trying to get their input, trying to get this passed. I know there are Democrat senators that want to vote for this bill, that can vote for this bill. So, putting all partisanship aside, again, I want to appeal to your better angels. Search your conscience. Sign on to a bill. Vote for a bill that ends using federal workers, the American public, as pawns. The senator from Maryland said last week, let's not punish federal workers for our dysfunction. But I think my closing argument has to be to go back to what the senator from Texas was talking about air traffic control in that situation. 500 safety issues reported recently in our skies. Search your conscience. Can you imagine? I mean, honestly, think about it. Imagine what the one Democrat staffer said, that we're going to cling to this until planes fall out of the sky. Think about how you would feel if, God forbid, a plane, another plane, fell out of the sky and people died. How could you live with yourself? Now, again, you can continue the shutdown. I mean, that's your political choice. You can continue to vote against the very reasonable House continuing resolution. But you can still vote to pay federal workers. You can vote to make sure that air traffic controllers get back to their stations and keep our skies as safe as possible. You can vote to dramatically reduce the chance that a plane will fall out of the sky. We just need 2 more of you. Two more of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are working with, quite honestly, folks on this side trying to end the shutdown. Just 2 of those that I spoke to that I thought would vote for this. I'm begging you, 2 more. Let's get on this bill. Let's pay federal workers. Let's make our nation safer. Let's do the fair thing. Let's do the right thing. Let's vote to proceed to this bill and get it passed. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. As my colleague from Louisiana wishes we were all here voting on the deal, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle had taken yes for an answer to open up the government. I wish that's what I was on the floor here today to do. That not being accomplished, what I was hoping to be able to do is once again offer a unanimous consent request to pay the people that are working. Came down to the floor 2 weeks ago with the Shutdown Fairness Act to pay the people that we're forcing to work. Pretty common sense. Did not include furloughed workers. The other side objected. I agreed to add furloughed workers. Worked with them over the last couple weeks. Came on the floor yesterday, offered that unanimous consent request, and there were more objections. So we offered a vote. So let's proceed to that bill. Let's work out literally clarification differences. There's really nothing substantive. We're going to pay all the workers being forced to work. We're going to pay all the furloughed workers. We added contractors. I mean, we've done just about everything we could so that we were no longer punishing the people working for our dysfunction. We're no longer going to use these individuals as pawns, and the American people as pawns in this horrific partisan gamesmanship. Unfortunately, the other side wouldn't agree to get on the bill, which, by the way, that's how you pass legislation around here. You get on a bill, it may not be perfect, there may be some objections to the other side, you open it up for amendments, you work on those differences, and then you know, again, if the other side doesn't particularly like the bill, they can vote no at the tail end. They can block it then. But instead, they blocked it on the front end. So we immediately went into discussions. Literally about an hour ago, I thought I had a deal where at least the primary objector of the Shutdown Fairness Act was not going to object. We've hit some snags. So unfortunately, I don't think in today's session we'll be able to offer that for unanimous consent request, but I do want to tell my colleagues we are still working hard. I can do everything I can to accommodate, to clarify the bills, to let the folks on the other side know, we're not creating a slush fund. We're not giving the president discretion to use this money wherever he wants. We're not excluding certain workers. We're not giving the president the ability to include or exclude. We're including all the workers. So again, I will continue to, and my staff is working overtime. God bless them, doing everything they can to be able to offer this. If we don't have a deal tomorrow, at least, I'm literally hoping and praying that folks on the other side of the aisle will, at a minimum, stop using federal workers, the American public, as pawns in this partisan gamesmanship. But doesn't look like we're going to be doing that tonight. But as long as we got some time on the floor, I guess what I'd like to do is I'd like to discuss a hearing we held earlier in the week in my permanent subcommittee on investigations. It was titled Assessing the Damage Done by Obamacare. I hate to report the folks on the other side refuse to acknowledge the very obvious damage being done across the board by Obamacare. I had 3 witnesses, and we kind of did this in 3 different categories. The first category was talking about the damage done by the consolidation of industries across the board in healthcare. If you want lower prices, I come from the private sector. What the free market guarantees is basically 3 things: the lowest possible price and cost, the highest quality, the highest level of customer service. Now, it's not perfect, but there's no economic system that works better than that. The problem we have in healthcare is we've largely driven free market principles out of healthcare. We have a third-party payer system. Decades ago, patients paid 80%, 80 cents on the dollar for the healthcare they received. Today, they pay about a dime. Somebody else is always picking up the tab for the specific procedure. Now, we pay dearly in taxes, in insurance premiums, but it's disconnected from the actual point of sale, from the actual cost of procedure. So there's no transparency. Doctors don't know what things cost. The provider, it's some accountant, and I love accountants, I'm one of them, but it's some accountant in the provider's back office dealing with some accountant in the insurance and some accountant in CMS or whichever third-party payer. So we had a complete breakdown of price transparency because we don't have free market principles, we don't have consumerism, true consumerism in healthcare. But this is a chart that the senator from South Carolina put up yesterday. I think others have used it as well, that really makes the point in terms of consolidation of the industry, which is, of course, when you have concentrated power, you have less competitive benefits. This is just the percent increase in the stock price of, I think, 7 of the top insurance carriers. United Health Group, 1,177% increase in stock price since the implementation of Obamacare. Cigna, 822%. Anthem, only 414%. Humana, 490. Molina, 859. Centene, 604. Aetna, 595% increase. This is a concentration of power, a reduction in competition, and this proves the increase in prices, the dollars, the trillions of dollars flowing into insurance companies, taxpayer dollars flowing to insurance companies because of the faulty design of Obamacare. That aided and abetted this consolidation, this lack of competition in the healthcare market. The second area of damage literally was to Medicaid. I mean, Obamacare is basically provided insurance through 2 mechanisms, Medicaid and the individual exchanges. Medicaid, of course, we talked about this in our One Big Beautiful Bill, the whole reconciliation package. The harm caused to Medicaid is profound. By allowing states to sign up able-bodied, single, working-age adults into Medicaid, that wasn't the main abuse. The main abuse is we reimbursed those states for every dollar they spent for a single able-bodied adult, they get $9 as a federal reimbursement. That compares to for every dollar spent on a disabled child, the states get $1.33. So that has led to rampant abuse. I would call it legalized fraud. Provider taxes, provider fees. That's not health care. But the American taxpayer is picking up the tab at a ratio of 9-to-1 for those state-directed payments and, again, provider fees, provider taxes. It's also crowded out services for the disabled. There was an excellent article in the Wall Street Journal written by the father of a 17-year-old severely autistic child. And God bless this family. They're taking care of this child at home. But they could use help. And so what they were hoping for is to be able to have access to home health care. They're on a 10-year waiting list because those providers would much rather service an able-bodied Medicaid Advantage adult as opposed to that disabled child. So again, we've crowded out those disabled children from Medicaid providers, and of course we've cost American taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. Provider fees, provider taxes, which unfortunately we weren't able to fix. The third area of damage done by Obamacare is in the individual markets. Now, I bought health care for 30 years. Every year we'd negotiate with the insurance carriers. I remember early on when we didn't have 100 employees even, and so I'm very familiar with the small employer group markets. Probably about 3 or 4 years into my buying health care, because of competition, we had an insurance carrier come in and say, you don't even need to have deductibles or out-of-pocket maximums. We're going to match your insurance rate, 0 deductibles. Thought, great. I mean, what a great year for our employees. They didn't pay a dime for anything. And the insurance rate was what we had the previous year. Well, of course, the next year, they jacked up our rates 40%, so I had to go back in the market. But that's just an anecdotal story of how competition actually worked. Now, again, I don't have the exact figures, but I do not recall, in the 30 years of buying health insurance, ending in about 2010, I don't ever recall a deductible, a per-person deductible. And generally, the way a family plan would work is you have, a number of deductibles, 2 or 3 per family. I don't recall one ever higher than $2,500, with an out-of-pocket maximum with the copays, the 20-80% copay. So a family would maybe have one person with illness. They'd go through their $2,500 deductible, and then if their charge is above that, 80-20 split, up to a maximum out-of-pocket of $5,000 per year. That's it. That's the most. Again, that started out back in the early 80s, started out maybe $100 deductible with a maximum out-of-pocket of $1,000. But again, that all, because of inflation, by the time I left, it was about $5,000 maximum out-of-pocket. What has happened because of Obamacare, the faulty design of it, forcing the small percentage of people on the individual exchanges to pick up the full cost of pre-existing conditions. Back when I was buying insurance, we had something called high-risk pools. They weren't perfect. Some modifications, we could have completely covered people with pre-existing conditions, but the way they worked is every insurer that sold products in the state had to basically take on people high risk. So as I'm buying insurance, let's say I had somebody who was diagnosed with cancer. The insurance carrier would come in, and they would do something they call laser out that individual. Not a problem, because that person right away would go into the high-risk pool, and there are so many different options in terms of deductibles, that type of thing. We could buy a plan for that individual from the high-risk pool, pretty much the exact same rates as we were getting, the exact same deductibles. If that person had a remission of cancer, no longer lasered out, he came back into our plan. It worked beautifully. It was funded by everybody. Everybody that had, employer-sponsored care, anybody that had insurance policy, a very small percentage was assessed to pay for that high-risk pool. Now, every state was different. Some states were adequately funded, some that weren't. I think Maine had an excellent high-risk pool. But Obamacare dismantled all of that and put the cost of those people with pre-existing conditions that are high risk on the backs of a single-digit percentage of the American population, causing insurance rates to skyrocket. When you hear our Democratic colleagues come to the floor and say, premiums are going to double and triple, well, first of all, that's not true. Gross premiums are going up an alarming 26% nationally, but they're not doubling and tripling. Not on employer-sponsored care, not for most people on the exchanges. What's happening is the net premium after subsidies for people over 400% of the poverty line that no longer get a subsidy, those people could be experiencing double or tripling rates. And quite honestly, from my standpoint, those are people I have a great deal of sympathy for that I would like to do something for. But we're not going to enter a negotiation until Democrats open up the government, okay? But again, I've said this repeatedly, I am happy to work with Democrats who will work in good faith, who will acknowledge the problem and repair the damage done by Obamacare and transition to a system that actually works. I think all Republicans are eager to do that. I know President Trump just had a tweet today. What we should be doing is we should be giving the American, these hundreds of billions we spend on this, give that to the American public and let them buy insurance policies that fit their needs, not the highly restrictive ones in Obamacare that have caused premiums to skyrocket. So what this chart shows, the red line here is the increase in the CPI. In other words, total inflation since the inception of Obamacare was 39%. All these blue bars, I know it's hard to read, this is every state, the percent increase in their premiums. I mean, it's for a 40-year-old enrolled in the silver benchmark. Again, averages are very difficult here because you have every state different, all these different plans, but we've picked one. This is pretty typical. So the average percent increase by state over all the states is 169% increase versus 39% increase in inflation. That's 4.3 times the rate of inflation. This is what has been happening to the 20-some million people on the individual exchanges. It's because the faulty design of Obamacare. It's got to be fixed. We can fix it. We know how to do it. You reinstitute high-risk pools. You give consumers a choice of all kinds of different options, short-term plans, catastrophic care. By the way, Obamacare insurance is what catastrophic plans looked like in the past, only orders of magnitude more expensive. So again, this is the gory snapshot of what Obamacare has done to individual premiums. Now, I've got another chart that shows you what's happened in the marketplace for employer-sponsored plans. You don't see anything up here at the over 300% level. You see really quite consistency because Obamacare didn't impact employer-sponsored care anywhere near to the extent that it did. Now, it's still way too high. On average, employer plans increased 74% since the inception of Obamacare. A lot of this is driven because of what Obamacare has done in terms of consolidation of every part of the healthcare industry. So there's no reason for these insurance rates to be almost double the rate of inflation. But it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference because there's greater freedom in the employer-sponsored insurance plans than there is in the very prescriptive Obamacare. This last chart, I'm glad I had it because in the hearing, my ranking member, the senator from Connecticut, made the statement that I don't know anybody who's been harmed by Obamacare. Huh? What? I mean, I already mentioned the consolidation of the industry. I mentioned the disabled child is being crowded out by an able-bodied, working-age, childless adult. I already talked about the dramatic increase in premiums for everybody. But the Democrats' own witness, a mom from Wisconsin, was a victim of Obamacare. This isn't exactly what her premiums are because she, quite honestly, didn't have all the information. But she had a few key pieces of information that we could go to look at Obamacare exchanges, come up with the premiums. But this is showing you what's actually happening, okay? This individual, a mom, 2 kids, great person, is a victim of Obamacare. In 2016, her employer dropped coverage because Obamacare gives small employers a great out of not having to put up with the rising healthcare costs by just saying we're not going to buy group insurance anymore. But trust me, I never liked having to buy group insurance for my employees, but you had to do it. To be competitive, you had to provide insurance. Again, I'd never want to see any of my employees go uninsured, but now you've got an option. And so a large number of particularly small employers are dropping coverage and forcing their employees into exchange. So in 2016, she got forced into these changes. Now, she initially bought a silver plan. It cost her $1,000 a month. Again, to me, some of you who bought insurance 15 years ago, unbelievably high insurance rate. $1,000 a month, unheard of back when I was buying insurance. So anyway, that was too expensive for her. So a couple of years later, she actually transferred to a bronze plan that she could afford. It cost her $250 a month. But it had a $14,000 deductible. Again, I said earlier, when I was buying it, out-of-pocket maximum for families was like $5,000. A $14,000 deductible, that was a catastrophic care plan. They were dirt cheap. So anyway, so they signed up for that plan. Unfortunately, they have some big health care bills. And her husband had to take out a $18,000 home line of credit. $18,000. This is the Democrat witness, a true victim of Obamacare. Now, of course, she's coming in, very sympathetically, asking us to extend the temporary enhanced subsidies. But this is what people need to understand. They obviously are under 400% of the poverty line because she's still getting subsidies. So look at the annual figures here. In 2025, with the subsidy, her gross premium, again, when the Democrats say, they're doubling premiums, they're talking about the net premium. But the gross premium was $15,000. She got a subsidy of almost $10,000. So she's paying $5,500 a year. Now, remember, in 2019, she had a silver plan. She was paying $12,000 a year. So now, with the enhanced subsidy, the temporary COVID one, again, remember, Democrats are the ones that chose it to expire. She's paying about $5,500. Fast forward, if she loses that enhanced subsidy, she still gets more. She gets a higher subsidy. She's still going to get $10,000, but because her gross premium, because of the faulty side of Obamacare, is going from $15,000 to $19,000, yeah, she's going to experience almost a $3,000 increase in her premium. But not because the enhanced subsidy went away. She's getting an increased dollar amount of subsidy. It's the dramatic increase in premiums that's driving this. And I'll close on this point because I see the senator from Florida, who, by the way, knows more about health care probably, maybe than anybody in America, certainly in this chamber, and he's got some great ideas on how to fix and repair the damage done by Obamacare and transition to a system that will actually work based on a competitive model. But the other point I want to make, because of their rhetoric, because of their demagoguery, Democrats are pretty well, I think, scared. Of course, that's their tactic, right? Let's scaremonger. Scared Americans into believing that everybody's premiums are going to double and triple. First of all, we're talking about the Obamacare exchanges, which they say they've got about 24 million people, but because of the no premium policies with these enhanced subsidies, there's probably about 6 million people with phantom plans. They don't even know they have coverage. Unscrupulous agents have signed them up. They get the commission. The premium goes right to the insurance company. They're none the wiser, and they make no claims. So we've gone from, I think, 4 million no-claim policies on the exchanges to 12 million. So obviously, there are a lot of phantom policies there. But the point I wanted to make is out of the, whatever the number is, it's really not 24 million. It's probably under 20 million, but I'll use that as a figure. Of the supposedly 24 million people on the Obamacare exchanges, almost 22 million are going to continue to get their subsidy. They're under 400% of the poverty line. You got about 1.6 that we know are over 400%. Their subsidy is going away. So if they were at 15 and going up to 19, instead of paying, they're going to have to pay $19,000. Those people I have a great deal of sympathy for. They were kind of duped into thinking that they could retire early. And now they're getting the rug pulled out from under them because the Democrats chose this plan, and now it's expiring. So I've got some ideas. I've actually shared them with our finance chair. I've shared them with Senator Scott. I'm not going to talk about them now because we need to open up the government first. But personally, I'm sympathetic with this. But we don't need to spend $20, $30 billion to address that small slice of the American population whose subsidies totally go away. The main point, and then I'll turn it over to the senator from Florida, my main point is almost 22 million Americans on the exchanges will continue to get subsidies, and because insurance rates are going, those subsidies on an annual basis are going to increase. They're not even going to decrease. The dollar amount will be increasing for most of those 22 million Americans. They're going to go back to the way Obamacare was originally designed. So if they can't afford the health care, based on going back to the way Obamacare was originally designed, it's not because the enhanced subsidy is going away. It's because of the way Obamacare was originally designed. It's failed miserably. It's damaged millions of people. And I am happy to sit down with the other side if they're willing to acknowledge the truth, admit they've got a problem, define the problem properly, do a root cause analysis, and actually enact reforms that will lower or certainly keep in check the cost of health care. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.